a gente fala em manejo do Psyllid no estado de São
Talk
Paulo,
about Psyllid's management in the state of São Paulo. We have internal actions in the farm, starting by monitoring of the yellow sticky, the yellow stickers, traps, and that's the basics, so that we can start thinking about Psyllids in the property, in the farm. But we know that this is not enough. But in the last years, the results of researches of Fundecitrus with our partners have shown that in addition to internal actions, also we need to have external actions, because only with these external actions that we are able to reduce, as it has been said, the primary dissemination. So when Psyllid leaves non-managed areas such as abandoned groves and backyards, and they go into the farm. So when we are able to reduce that source of external inoculants, we'll be able to reduce the arrival of Psyllids in the farms, and hoping to also to reduce the number of sprayings in the groves. But there are some more sustainable measures that are there, and they will be readily used in the groves, and we'll talk about that in the next panel. I'll talk about the process, the culling. Italo will talk about the bioinsecticide as well. These are measures that will be integrated to the internal actions. But when we talk about monitoring of psyllids, we always think about visual inspections here in São Paulo and the yellow sticky strap. But in the last few years, several studies carried out by Fundecitrus have shown that in areas where you have the chemical control, the most effective method is the yellow sticky strap. Because if you have a plant that is being frequently controlled by insecticide spraying, it's just obvious that the psyllids will get to the plant and will die after some time. But the fact that the inspector comes to that plant and finds the psyllid is kind of casual. But on the other hand, the sticky strap is a constant method of collection. Whether the psyllid comes in the same day, the next day, if the psyllid sticks to the trap, the inspector will be able to get there and find and see the insect there, because at some time this insect was in the grove. And when we compare both of these types of inspections, we find that the sticky trap will detect 30 times more than the visual inspection. And so I always say that in my presentations. I'm not saying that this is the most efficient method, but from considering what we have today, this is the most efficient. And how can we improve the efficacy of this trap? So you please come to Walter's presentation in the next panel. He will talk about pheromones, and that's how you increase the efficacy of this trap. And where are we going to place this trap? Especially on the border of plots of the farm, because that's going to help identifying plots that have higher incidence of psyllids. And consequently, we will have a differentiation in management there. When we talk about the psyllids management, it's not only to spray insecticides, we have to have a smart control. In the past, we used to say about chemical control, that was for the whole farm. Now we already know that we have plots where we have to have a higher frequency, another part of the farm where we will have a lower frequency of spraying. And all of that starts to develop itself in terms of psyllids management. Well, this is the basic, and it's in our manual that has distributed to you. This is from the Citrus recommendation regarding chemical control that starts in the nursery, also young grove and adult grove. And I'll talk about them in the next slides. When we talk about nursery control, and we do have some studies in Fundecitrus that show it, we have to spray systemic insecticides as close as possible to that baby plant in the field, because if we apply that still some more days before in the nursery, the plants do not need that. They're in the nursery yet, and you end up washing out the insecticide. So growers have to understand that you have to do this type of application in order to gain protection time in the field, so you have to calculate that period of time. Now, young orchards, it has a greater vegetative flow, so we recommend to have the systemic insecticides 3 to 4 times a year, and for adult growths with a frequency of 7 to 20 days of spraying. Well, Fundecitrus has developed a chemical control guide. It's on our website. I cannot go into the details, but you will have here information about volumes, the doses for systemic insecticides application, and different chemical groups also for sprayed insecticides. You can download that from our website free, and that's free. So when you talk about that treatment in the nursery, you do it 1 in 2 days, and then you take the plants to the field. We do have studies carried out by Fundecitrus, also students from Master Citrus studied it, and here we have a trend curves of the different studies that were carried out. We see here the insecticides. It was treated in the nursery a few days before and then planted in the field. So what is the protection time in the field? We see that the insecticides and the imidacloprid will have 75 days, controlling from 80 or more days, and then it will reach 75, close to 80 days, while the thiamethoxam insecticides will have a greater control period. And this is very interesting when compared to here, when we say here the control, these are the non-treated areas. This is a very important application that needs to be carried out in this period of time for the plants in the field. We also carried out other studies to understand what happens when insects feed from the plant. We know psyllids are no different from other insects. So and they are sucking insects. We have a technique in which we can control and monitor electronically the behavior of this insect in the computer. So the psyllid will introduce its stylet in the plant, and it goes up to the phloem. When it reaches the phloem, the psyllid has a salivation, and probably this is the phase of inoculation. We are studying that to better understand the process. And then they ingest the sap, and that's the acquisition of the bacteria. So, and when it lands in the plant that is treated with the systemic products, and we have seen that the thiamethoxam and imidacloprid, it will cause a reduction of 90% of feeding time in the phloem. Michelle Souza is also studying that in Fundecitrus, and her study involves the following: in ideal conditions of temperature and insect development to inoculate the bacteria, they have treated the plant with systemic insecticides, and they have insects to inoculate treated baby plants. And this study is still going on, but the initial data show us that around 80%, there's an 80% reduction in the inoculation, showing this is a treatment that should be carried out. When we talk about growths that are still being formed from 1 to 3 years of age, we already have a reduction in the control period that is expected. The different products available in the market will provide that. Imidacloprid and thiamethoxam. Imidacloprid with 30 to 40 days, and thiamethoxam a little bit over 50 days. So what will cause this curve and this control period being larger or not? So it has to do with the vegetative flow. When we apply systemic insecticide, different from the sprayed one, when we talk about a calendar, the systemic has to be applied in the right time. And I'll talk more about that shortly. But one thing that we have seen constantly is that when you start seeing the vegetative flow, even a little bit less than in this picture, when you see the bud, this is the moment when you have to spray systemic insecticides, and you see that after 7 days they are controlling almost 100%. So this is an important treatment, but that will depend on soil moisture to do the application with the drench, and also the applications that will tell you if this insecticide will control more or less time. We do have some areas that Fundecitrus follow up. These are 2 different areas here. We study them comparing spraying at every 15 days plus 3 to 4 systemic applications a year versus biweekly spraying. One is in São Paulo and one is in Limeira. So what we have seen after 4 years in the areas where we had a full recommendation spraying plus systemic applications, there was a reduction in 50% in HLB incidence. Therefore, you see that it's important to have the 2 different sprayings, and one is complementary to the other. Mixture volume. In the last few years, this has evolved a lot. We studied it a lot. There was a significant reduction of what was before in the beginning with a problem with HLB to what is done today. So today we have a methodology that talks about mLs for cubic meter of the canopy. I will not go into details, but my colleague will go into that later on in another presentation. And Fundecitrus has calculated and has sized this spraying. He will bring you more details on that. But in general, and this is a whole set of results from different assays, but when you have these volumes 70, 40, and 25, in these different volumes, in the first week, all volumes, you say there's a good control period. After the second week, you see the 25 mLs per cubic meter is not killing over 80%, is here at 70, 75, and while 40 and 70, you have a good control over 80%. But all our experiments are done in field conditions. In average, we did have some rains here, 15 to 9 millimeters, and that ends up affecting it, so that in the third week, the efficacy went down to 40 to 50%, and you see that 40 ml and 70 ml were similar. We also have studies here, but when you get this 25 and you adjust the dose to 40, what happens? Basically, you end up getting the same results. But if you adjust to 25 to 70, then you gain the control period, a larger control period. But that's like we say, sometimes it's not, there's no use of adjusting dose, because if it rains, you will lose this efficacy, so it will depend on the situation. We have here the coverage for these insecticides, the volume of 70, 40, a little bit over 40, and 25 and 33% of coverage. When we talk about that coverage for psyllid, 30%, that is enough to cause high mortality rate. So, and remember that in the psyllid management, or actually the citrus management, we have application for other diseases with higher volumes. So how should we fit this part into this puzzle? So we have the black spot, and you use volumes of 70 mLs per cubic meter. So in those applications, you already have insecticides there. And complementary sprayings would be using 40 and 25. In areas where you will have a higher frequency of application, weekly for instance, you may use 25. If you have more extensive applications, you will use higher volume. Now you're carrying out a study. This year we'll conclude it, and we compare volumes versus spraying frequency. And as I said, regarding rainfall, we also have a study regarding the effect of the simulated rainfall. The simulated rainfall is never the same as the real rainfall. When you talk about 10 millimeters here, it's not the same as 10 millimeters in the field. You have different types of 10 millimeters rain in the field, but this is just to understand what happens. So really, are insecticides washed out? We usually say that systemic insecticides are not washed out, but I should tell you that all insecticides are washed out with the rain. Some of them will suffer more or less. The methoato will suffer less, but some others will have more problems. And here this is a general model with no rain, so they will be closing to killing 100%, and after 5 mm rainfall, you will have the same result here in a reduction of 50%. And then the question, what if I add an adjuvant? Would that help in the control of psyllids? Will I gain a control period? So we worked with one of the insecticides, the imidacloprid. It really takes a hit with a washout. We added a mineral oil that is considered an universal adjuvant, and we got a product from the market that was another adjuvant with an adhesive effect. So in this situation with no rain at all, as expected, there is no difference among them if we add the adjuvant. But now when we applied the 10 mm rainfall, we were able to see in the first day that the insects were confined in different periods here. And in the beginning, well, it looks like after raining 10 mm, you confine the insect, and it looks like you have a gain with the mineral oil and the adjuvant. But really, there is no significant gain here. So we don't see significant gain here. Especially because we have an additional cost here for control. Silvio talked about sprouting, and this is a study we carried out using that technique as well, that we are able to monitor the insect behavior, and this is the time after the insect lands in this area here. That's the time that the insect takes to get to the phloem. So you see here V3, 4, 5, and 6 in the mature leaf. When you compare the mature leaf to the sprout that is in the maturating stage, you will see that the insect takes 2 times more to get to the phloem in the mature leaf, and in newer sproutings that time could be even 3 times higher in the mature leaf than in the sprouted area. So what we can say is that in the mature leaf, maybe the insecticide is acting before the inoculation, but in the shoot, the stylet will have access to the phloem faster, so maybe the insect will get to the phloem before dying, and maybe the insect will die after that, but the insect has the chance of inoculating the bacteria. So it is like V2 is like a filet mignon for the psyllids, and V6 is like a hard piece of meat. Well, here we also see that when you have a spraying, and these are field studies and also lab studies that we have gathered here, so you confine insects in the shoot, in the mature leaf, they all control well. But after 1 week, look here, just imidacloprid and thiamethoxam controlled well, but in the mature leaf it went well, and after 2 weeks it's around 50%, is an average time here. It's 50% against 25. Here you have other effects, also rainfall effects. So you see this effect and the sprouting period. So that's why we have to increase spraying in the sprouting period. Sometimes people say that Brazilians do love insecticides and that we spray a lot. But I developed a comparison here showing doses used in Florida. And when I say Florida, you may also consider the Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, because they follow the same dose systems there. So that is compared to the recommended doses in the state of São Paulo. So these are common insecticides used there and here. So when you consider the leaflet concentration there, and you compare their concentration to ours, so the concentration recommended there is much higher than ours. So some insecticides is 8 times more higher, 7 here in imidacloprid, and some of them a little bit less, such as the methoato. Therefore, you see that these insecticides are important. We have to be careful about them, but our doses, our lower doses than in the United States. Now, when we compare it, and here you may see it based on their studies, a 6-year group will use 906 liters per hectare, and here considering 500 liters per hectare, considering their 12 applications, and here considering a general one which would be bi-weekly applications, 24 years. Even with these 24 applications against 12, here we would have a reduction in 65% in the amount of active ingredients per hectare. So the frequency of spraying is higher, but the amount of insecticides per area per hectare sometimes is lower, and it could be much lower when compared to theirs. So my last slides to conclude, these are data from our health plant alert. We have areas with no management and with management. You see a huge difference, as João Lopes has shown yesterday. So the greater population here is between the end of winter and spring. So here we have to have a smart control. That's when we have to focus. For instance, you got here in the beginning of August and September, do you have the ideal conditions that when you should do the systemic application in the grove? And Marcelo, would you recommend 3 to 4 times at Fundecitrus? But I only have budget for 2 systemic applications. You have 2, you should do both of them in this period of time, because this is the key control period for psyllids, and that's when we have to increase frequencies. Oh, I don't have my budget, I don't have a good budget, I cannot increase frequency. Well, you should have an application in June or July with lower population of psyllids, and then you will direct the greater number of applications to this period of time. Thank you to all my field team from Fundecitrus. They're all here. They are the ones that go to the field, and all the results that you have seen were produced by them. Our partner companies I would like to thank as well, and especially to the growers that do support our work. Thank you.